It has been known by many names, some hauntingly mysterious. Shalem, Zion, Yerushalem, Yerushalayim, their origins lost in the depths of time. Standing guard like a sentinel atop its lofty mountain perch, it gazes out over the vast and arid expanses of the Judean desert, proclaiming a message of righteousness, justice, and moral perfection. Ancient sages said that of the 10 measures of beauty bestowed upon the world, a full 9 had been apportioned to Jerusalem. They were making reference to what may well be the most authentic Jerusalem of all, the holy city of dreams and ideals. In the sharp light of earthly reality, it has fared far less well. But whatever its shortcomings and imperfections, Jerusalem knows how to work a magic upon the human soul. The steady march of ordinary time loses its strict dominion over our lives, events out of a remote past melding seamlessly with the immediate present. People taking stock of their existence against a backdrop of eternity. It is a place where one may experience a kind of inner serenity one has never felt before, which is what is so often meant when we say we have found Jerusalem. The biblical narrative, that compelling moral and imaginative force at the root of our civilization, has for its home the land of Israel. The varied natural geography shaped the early history of the Jewish nation and provided the setting for its independent political life for 1,000 years. At the very center of the people's spiritual world was the city of God upon a mountain. In searching for the source of Jerusalem's immense and enduring power, we must look to a modest elevation of hard limestone rock, Mount Moriah, which in our time lies concealed for the most part under massive stone ramparts and resplendent religious shrines. For there, upon its barren summit, was enacted a stirring drama. Abraham, take your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and make a burnt offering of him upon one of the mountains there which I will tell you of. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And an angel of the Lord called to him out of heaven, saying, Lay not your hand upon the boy, for now I know you fear God. The echoes of the awesome test of faith to which the Almighty Lord of the universe put Abraham, the first Jew, have resounded down through the centuries with an undiminished intensity. Absolute in his devotion to his God, this towering figure, patriarch of a nation, has served as an inspiration for the adherents of the Jewish faith in every age, and no less so for the adherents of Christianity and Islam, daughter religions born of Judaism. Throughout its long history, whether assembled within its native land or scattered far and wide over continents during prolonged exiles, the Jewish people continued to cherish a collective memory of Mount Moriah, the seat down on earth of its God up in heaven. The district of Moriah would come over time to be settled by diverse peoples. Blasted by sun and dry winds, water was always in short supply, wood almost totally absent. And so it was then that the earliest builders turned their attention and skills to the raw flesh of the mountain, the limestone bedrock under their feet. This, the most indestructible of naturally occurring materials, came to constitute the very backbone of the local architecture. And by virtue of its constancy and solid strength, to inspire us with a reassuring sense of our God. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. Utilizing a rich vocabulary of styles, techniques, and changing fashions, a visible record of the city's lengthy and varied history has been etched into its surfaces and sculpted into its forms. By learning to decipher this mute but eloquent language, we are able to breathe new life into events confined for thousands of years to the pages of books alone. Whereas archaeological exploration, shifting its gaze downwards into the hidden depths beneath our own age, gropes its way layer after layer through the accumulated debris of past epochs, reconstructing vanished worlds. This impressive fortification, for example, unearthed on the southerly slope of Mount Moriah, is a keyhole through which we can gain a fascinating glimpse, however incomplete, of the very beginnings of Jerusalem itself. It's very likely that these mighty walls, unearthed on the slope of Mount Moriah, are the Canaanite defenses that faced King David, the illustrious second monarch of the Jewish kingdom in the land of Israel, back 3,000 years ago. David had decided upon the sacred hill, scene of Abraham's great trial of faith, for his new capital city. In addition to its religious significance, the hilltop stronghold enjoyed a favorable position, midway between the competing power centers of the northern and southern Israelite tribes united under his rule. But first, David needed to conquer the elevation from the Jebusites who occupied it. And the daunting uphill climb must surely have filled the hearts of his troops with dread. The biblical account suggests, however, that the Jewish king thoroughly outwitted his Canaanite adversaries, chancing upon an underground tunnel through which the villagers gained secret access to their one and only source of water, the outlying Gihon spring beyond the walls. The royal commander and his soldiers infiltrated into the center of town, undetected by the defenders high over their heads. Following the dedication of his new capital, thereafter to be known as Zion, the city of David, and Jerusalem, the king ordered the transfer of the Ark of God to the new seat of government and rule. The Ark contained the stone tablets of the law which had been received by Moses on Mount Sinai, and was the most precious and holy of Israelite possessions. It would be left, however, to David's son and heir Solomon to put the finishing touches to his father's religious initiatives, constructing a magnificent edifice, the temple, on the summit of Moriah. Solomon installed the Ark of the Covenant in its innermost and most sacred chamber, the Holy of Holies. Jerusalem was assured now of a supreme and unassailable position in the Jewish spiritual universe. But the tiny and vulnerable kingdom was to be tossed about on the stormy seas of world history, always tottering on the very brink of total disaster. Straddling the crossroads of 3 continents, it lay in the path of great empires extending their grasp both eastwards and westwards. Recent archaeological activity has contributed greatly to our understanding and appreciation of the biblical source. Researchers are inclined to believe, for instance, that this structure, discovered beneath the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem's Old City, is no less than a portion of the wall constructed by the Judean king Hezekiah in the 8th century before the Christian era. Armies of the Assyrian Empire, marching from the heartland of Mesopotamia towards Egypt, had put the Jewish kingdom in peril, and as the Bible tells us, Hezekiah desperately set about strengthening the city's defenses. Indeed, this ruin, located right next to the ancient wall, could very well be one of the houses mentioned by the prophet Isaiah, Hezekiah's contemporary, when he said, "The houses you broke down to strengthen the wall." Though disaster at the hands of the Assyrians was averted, the Babylonians 150 years later succeeded where their predecessors had failed. Jerusalem was laid waste, the nation was driven into exile. Any real sense of independent Jewish political life was extinguished for the better part of a century. Mount Zion lying desolate, foxes prowling over it. Can we conclude then that the missing upper parts of the wall were battered down during the Babylonian attacks? Perhaps. But what we can state with certainty is that the Jewish masons who laid these great stones 27 centuries ago would have had little difficulty communicating with the residents of the present-day apartments above. For Hebrew, unspoken for the most part since ancient times, has been resurrected directly from the pages of the Bible and other antique manuscripts to become the living, breathing language of the modern state of Israel. For a small nation, even one under the protection of God, survival in a world made up of mighty giants all around it meant a significant degree of political compromise, if not outright subservience. There was, on the other hand, an increased sense of security, not to say great material benefits, to be gained from sheltering in the long shadow of an unchallenged world power. It is the 1st century before the Common or Christian era, the final chapter in the story of the 1,000-year Jewish kingdom of ancient times. An expanding Roman Empire is swallowing up lands and peoples en route. The Jews and their home territory are no exception. The widespread prosperity and stability that accompanied Pax Romana did much to lessen the sting of subjugation by the polytheistic and idolatrous overlord. It is in large measure thanks to recent discoveries by Israeli archaeologists in and around the sacred mountaintop of Moriah that we have gained a keener appreciation of the exceptionally noble proportions of the Jerusalem of that period. The local initiatives were the doing of an immensely clever and opportunistic king, Herod the Great, who succeeded in turning his warm relations with the emperor in Rome to great advantage, giving free rein to his taste for the flamboyant and grandiose in a series of elaborate building projects throughout his realm and beyond its borders. But, mindful of his responsibility as King of the Jews, it was the redevelopment on an unprecedented scale of the sacred temple complex atop Moriah that was meant to be Herod's crowning achievement. The final result was an elevated podium of tremendous size, its center graced by a sumptuously adorned shrine rebuilt from the foundations. Equal in area to about a dozen modern football stadiums, the sheer magnitude of the holy precinct left a powerful impression on all who beheld it, as it still does today, 20 centuries later, though much ravaged by the subsequent events of history and the passage of years. In the dimly lit interior of the Holy of Holies of the house of God, the mountaintop, elsewhere concealed beneath the paving, broke through the surface and into view. The high priest was the only mortal permitted entry into that mysterious chamber, where, standing by the patch of exposed bedrock, the so-called foundation stone, he experienced firsthand the Lord's indwelling earthly presence. Plentiful remains found in the immediate environs of the temple complex, undoubtedly one of the wonders of the antique world, are still coming to light with every probe into the ground. Upon tunneling deep under the Western Wall Plaza, for example, an extensive network of streets and buildings from that Herodian city have been laid bare. This marvelously well-preserved hall, abutting up against the elevation, was excavated largely intact. This, a doorway, would have opened onto sunlit thoroughfares in those days. Burrowing deeper still, investigators ran headlong into the lower courses of the monumental retaining wall that today, no less than back then, provides critical support for the enormous platform located just the other side of it. The exquisite level of craftsmanship, coupled with the great size of its individual building blocks, which, though weighing upwards of 400 tons, were set in place with absolute precision, continue both to astonish and to humble us. In its upper reaches, this imposing structure pierces through the debris that has accumulated over thousands of years, emerging into the light of day as the Western Wall, Judaism's most hallowed site. Continuing southward, this street running alongside the temple precinct would have been teeming with a diverse mix of people, both local and foreign, mostly Jews but not exclusively, come to visit one of the splendors of the world. While high over their heads loomed a huge arching staircase and ornamental gate, telltale traces of which are still clearly visible. But beneath this glittery surface of ostentation and magnificence, the growing frustrations of the subject Jewish nation were gradually mounting to a dangerous level. People looked to their God for salvation. It is the 1st century of the Common Era, and the Jewish nation is subject to the might of Rome. Scattered pockets of opposition to the pagan overlords are forming here and there beneath the deceptively tranquil surface of local life, as growing numbers of people feel themselves and their kingdom to be mere pawns in the service of broader Roman imperial interests. Some pinned their hopes for liberation upon that wooded elevation to the east of the Holy City, which, because of its extensive groves of olive trees, had come to be known as the Mount of Olives. For in the view of the biblical prophets, the rocky prominence was destined to play a fateful role in the great drama of the so-called End of Days. On that day the Lord's feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which lies before Jerusalem to the east, and the Lord will become king over all the earth. The prophetic utopia envisaged a kingdom of Israel freed from the bonds of foreign rule, its one true God reigning supreme from atop sacred Moriah, and shining like a moral beacon to all nations and peoples in a world blessed with universal harmony and peace. Evolving popular tradition spoke of a divinely anointed human emissary, a Messiah, descended by blood from King David, whose appointed mission was to usher in the dawning of the new age of heavenly perfection on earth. As he made his way down the steep slope of the Mount of Olives, the generations of dead resting in what is the holiest of all Jewish burial grounds would arise up out of their graves, resurrected to an eternal life of bliss in the golden age Jerusalem of the end of times. The triumphal entry into the city by Jesus of Nazareth was viewed by some as the realization of these poignant longings. The enthusiastic welcoming party of believers in his messianic status crowded tightly round him, waving palm branches in the manner reserved for greeting Jewish heroes and victors. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices. But as the Christian gospel narrative relates in recalling these events, just then, in the midst of the general excitement, Jesus came to an abrupt halt. Gazing into the distance, he was stricken by a sorrowful vision concerning the eventual fate of his beloved city of God. As he approached Jerusalem, he wept over it and said, "They will dash you to the ground. They will not leave one stone upon another in you." The arrival of Jesus of Nazareth in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday was by no means his first visit to the holy city and capital. Like all Jews, he had made pilgrimage at the appointed festival times to the exquisite temple complex built by King Herod. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. It is quite likely that he found temporary lodgings on such occasions in a dwelling similar to this, one of many structures on earth in the near vicinity of the temple area. And that after having undergone ritual purification by immersion in a mikveh bath, he joined the solemn procession making its way up these very steps to the monumental gateway at the top, through which one gained access to the open-air plaza and sanctuary overhead. But in other ways, the Galilean Jew was anything but typical, and word soon spread regarding the miracles and healings he was performing. As he went along, he saw a blind man from birth. Mixing his spit with earth, Jesus took the mud and spread it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." So the man washed and came home seeing. Now there is in Jerusalem near the Sheep Gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda. Bethesda, or Beit Hesda, means the place of healing or mercy. Today there are only scant remains of the therapeutic pools to which came the lame, the ill, and the blind of Jerusalem, in the hope of gaining a remedy for their various maladies. It was the Sabbath day when Jesus spotted a long ailing cripple. "Do you want to be healed?" he said to him. "Rise, pick up your mat and walk." So the invalid picked up his mat and walked. But Jesus' unbridled criticism of the Jewish religious authorities and the rumors about his being the long-awaited national liberator were certain to get him into serious trouble sooner or later. It was winter and Jesus was in the temple, walking in the area of Solomon's colonnade. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." The messianic expectations surrounding the sage from the Galilee gravely threatened the delicate balance that had been achieved between submission to Roman domination on the one hand and Jewish religious autonomy on the other. In the atmosphere of increasing hostility, Jesus sought ever more frequent refuge in the nearby countryside. From the sublime heights of the Mount of Olives, he was able to observe the holy city and house of God at a safe distance, while inspiring his devoted disciples with a promising vision of a new world order, which, he assured them, was soon to replace the old one. It is widely believed that in this very grotto, Jesus gathered together his tight inner circle of friends and followers, instructing them in the so-called divine or secret mysteries, those signs and portents which were to signal the onset of the approaching end of times. Built over top of the cave is to be found the Pater Noster, or Our Father Church. For here, or very nearby, he also recited for the first time what is perhaps the best known of all Christian prayers. Jesus' enemies were steadily closing in on him, yet he refused to flee from Jerusalem. Destiny, he felt, must be left to run its course. He sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover. As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will show you a large upper room, all furnished." This particular room dates from around 800 years ago, but stands presumably on the site of the room where the Last Supper was held. The table is decked out for the Jewish festive meal of the Passover. A mood of almost gloomy foreboding settles upon the 12 assembled disciples and their master, and not the usual spirit of celebration and thanksgiving that informs the annual commemoration of liberation from captivity. Significantly enough, one floor below is to be found the traditional tomb of King David, father of the bloodline from which the Jewish Messianic Redeemer was expected to come. Within reasonable walking distance from the room of the Last Supper, and at the very base of the Mount of Olives, is a secluded grove of trees, a favorite retreat of Jesus. In his native Aramaic tongue, he would have known it by the name Gat-Shamna, meaning the oil press, a reference to the installations, a few of which still survive, used for squeezing the precious green fluid from the ripened black fruits. We, in our time, pronounce the name of the garden Gethsemane. Following the Passover meal, or Seder, and under the cover of darkness, Jesus left to pay one final visit to the tranquil refuge. His pursuers were hot on his trail, and he wished to have one last word with God, his Father. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Suddenly, brightly glowing torches make their appearance in the distance, outside the eastern gates of the city. A melee of excited voices violates the serene stillness of the spring night. Escape is impossible. Abandoned at this critical hour by his slumbering disciples, Jesus realizes that the end is at hand. Bound and blindfolded, the prisoner is brought for interrogation before a gathering of religious notables. 2 days later, in the Antonia fortress, the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate casts judgment. Sentence is passed. Accused of sedition, the condemned man must face a grim fate. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement. We descend deep beneath the Ecce Homo convent. Making our way through a labyrinth of subterranean passageways, we enter an ancient water cistern, reaching eventually at journey's end a segment of stone pavement, believed by some to be that of the courtyard of the Antonia fortress, buried for thousands of years beneath the ground. Etched into its time-worn surfaces can be detected ancient games of one sort or another, for the entertainment of the Roman soldiers in their leisure moments, perhaps. Tradition commemorates the path Jesus followed through the crowded Jerusalem markets, from his trial in the Antonia fortress to the local site of execution, as the Via Dolorosa. It was the season of the Passover pilgrimage, and the lanes of the Holy City were teeming with visitors. Now and then he falters under his intolerable burden. At one point, Jesus' mother, Mary, pushes her way through the thick wall of onlookers to comfort her son.
The fifth station. Here, the Cyrenian helps Jesus carry the cross.
At the fifth station, the path becomes an almost impossibly difficult uphill trek to the craggy summit of the execution site. One of the oldest churches in the entire world, the Holy Sepulchre, or Holy Tomb Church, stands today over the final stations of the Way of the Cross. We must use our imaginations to recreate the limestone elevation located just outside of the city during Roman times. A hill resembling closely enough in its shape a human skull for the local population to nickname it Golgotha, or Calvary, that's to say, Skull Hill. Climbing up the steep set of steps, we arrive at the crucifixion place. The tomb belonging to the family of Joseph Arimathea, in which Jesus' body was laid to rest, would have looked more or less like this. A typical Jewish burial cave of its time, with a huge rolling stone set in place in front of the entrance following burial, as a safeguard against intruders. Today, an impressive monument inside the rotunda of the Holy Sepulchre Church marks the original location of what is believed to have been the authentic burial cave. We are told that but a short 3 days afterwards, a first sighting is made of the executed man, and word quickly spreads that he has returned from the dead. At the end of 40 days of resurrection, during which he roams about the land and reveals himself to his disciples, Jesus climbs to the top of Olivet in the company of his closest confidants for a final time, entrusting them with an encouraging vision of his eventual return and fulfillment of the millennial dream of the Jewish prophets. He bids them farewell and makes his ascent into the heavens. The various remains of an extremely ancient Christian shrine join with the elegant spire of a more modern Russian Orthodox church to give noble expression to the awe-inspiring event. As the new Judeo-Christian faith tradition spread around the world, ever greater numbers of believers in Almighty God placed His holy city of Jerusalem at the center of their imaginative universe. But human events appeared to be out of step with inspired visions. The subject Jewish nation rose up in revolt against its Roman overlords with the gravest of consequences. The Judean kingdom was pulverized, its citizens slaughtered. The magnificent capital city laid waste. God's house was put to the torch. Heaps of stones found buried precisely where they had fallen after being battered down by the Roman war machines bear mute witness to the calamity. While the remains of luxurious homes beneath the modern-day houses of the old city bespeak an extinct way of life in a kingdom which met a violent and fiery end. Sovereign Jewish political existence had come to an abrupt and full stop. The new pagan city Aelia Capitolina, arising upon the ruins of the devastated Jewish capital, acquired within 3 centuries a distinctly Christian character. Initially outlawed and persecuted by the Romans, the daughter faith of Judaism was elevated to the status of official religion of their vast empire. A bitter fate befell the defeated, a lengthy exile and dispersion to the 4 corners of the earth, as they turned wanderers now in other people's lands. Nearly 600 years after the destruction of the ancient Jewish kingdom, there appeared in far-off Arabia a new prophet to Almighty God. His name was Muhammad. The prophet's disciples, known as Muslims, meaning the submissive or obedient ones, also looked back to Abraham's uncompromising religious zeal as a model worthy of emulation. Very early Muslim traditions speak of a mysterious night journey undertaken by the prophet Muhammad astride a fabulous winged creature, half beast, half human, named El-Burak. The prophet was whisked through the skies from his native Arabia to the so-called far-away holy place, identified by Islamic religious authorities with the site of the destroyed Jewish temple atop Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. Muhammad bounded heavenwards astride his mythic animal from the peak of the sacred hill, his upward journey taking him ultimately into the very presence of God, where he received the commandment to pray 5 times daily, returning thereafter to his native Arabia before the dawn broke. Following the prophet's death, conquering Muslim armies overran the greater part of the region, bringing Jerusalem under Islamic domination for centuries to come. The magnificent Dome of the Rock Shrine, the city's outstanding architectural monument, was constructed over the rocky pinnacle of Mount Moriah. Commemorating the precise point in Islamic tradition from which Muhammad had ascended into the heavens, it stood, not coincidentally, exactly where Jewish lore set the story of the binding of Isaac, and where had stood the Jewish house of God a full 6 centuries prior to the arise of Islam. Further to the south on the Great Plaza, newly reconsecrated by the Islamic faith, was built another shrine, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Al-Aqsa means distant or far away, echoing in its name the faraway holy place to which the Prophet Muhammad had journeyed on his miraculous steed, as described in the Muslim sacred scriptures, the Quran. A succession of Islamic regional powers would be the masters of Jerusalem for the better part of the next 13 centuries. Though for one brief interlude, during the Crusades, control passed temporarily into European Christian hands. But a successful counteroffensive mounted by the legendary Muslim warrior Saladin sounded the death knell for the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem a mere 100 years after its establishment. Islam regained its dominant position, and the material legacy of medieval Christian culture in the Holy City was either obliterated or transformed to meet Muslim tastes and forms of religious worship. The Ottoman Empire, centered in Turkey, was the last of the great Muslim powers to establish its hegemony over a large swath of the Middle East. The new rulers embarked upon a series of ambitious public works in Jerusalem, not least amongst which was a thoroughgoing restoration of the badly ravaged city walls. Observed from a distance, the elegant workmanship of these fortifications rarely failed to make a powerful impression on visitors to the Holy City in subsequent centuries. And coupled with the antique monuments in the near vicinity, seemed to hold promise of even greater wonders yet, concealed from view within. But the initial delight and wonderment soon gave way to profound disappointment. Once through the gates, the pilgrims were greeted with the mean and somber reality of a remote outpost of the Islamic world in steep decline. In the 400 years of Ottoman Turkish rule, Jerusalem slipped deeper and deeper into a comatose stagnation. Impoverished, disease-ridden, and backward, a donkey-paced drowsiness had replaced the splendors and majesty of days gone by. In short, the city of God had become almost exclusively a city of memories. The present had little to offer, the past everything. The adherents of the three religious communities, living side by side in adjoining quarters of the same depressing earthly Jerusalem, dwelt for the most part within the radiant promise of their various visions of a heavenly Jerusalem. In this respect, little has changed. For the Jews and the Christians, as tolerated religious minorities in the realm of Islam, life was neither easy nor secure. Their survival often hinged on the generosity of sympathetic co-religionists in distant lands, who, appreciative of their steadfast piety and self-sacrifice, contributed monies towards their maintenance and well-being. In the latter part of the 19th century, these kinds of philanthropic efforts soon took on a transformative character, setting in motion far-reaching changes in the urban landscape. For both foreign benefactors and local developers started turning their attention to the empty tracts of land in the wilderness beyond the protection of the fortifications. New initiatives sprouted on every hill in the surrounding countryside, formerly the domain of Bedouin marauders. This activity encompassed all of the city's diverse religious and ethnic communities. The modernizing tendencies accelerated during the 2 decades of British-mandated administration, which governed the land in the first half of the 20th century. And the disparities between the tightly packed and often tumble-down quarters of the old city, with their distinctly Levantine aspect, and the newer sections of town with their spacious layout, and comfortable European-style housing became all the more striking. A full 20 centuries have elapsed since the ancient Jewish kingdom was crushed by the Roman armies and its people scattered to the four winds. But a vivid collective memory of their city of God, Jerusalem, and the dream of their eventual homecoming furnished the Jewish exiles throughout the ages with a wellspring of hope and inspiration. It was the steadfast devotion to this idea that supplied the impetus for what was to be one of the grandest undertakings in all of human history.
So said the Almighty Lord, I will save my people from the eastern lands and the western lands. I will bring them back to live in Jerusalem.
As the 19th century drew to a close, the Jewish nation awakened to the very real possibility of a large-scale repatriation to the land of Israel, scene of its once great sovereign political and cultural life. At first but a meager trickle of courageous pioneers, the ranks of the returning exiles swelled into a sizable migration within a few decades. Idealists were joined by desperate refugees as the horrors perpetrated against the stateless and defenseless people on alien soil acquired unprecedented proportions. But the road back to Israel, to Jerusalem, was long and difficult, and was to exact yet a further price in blood.
Once again, old men and old women will sit in the streets of Jerusalem. And the streets of the city will be filled with young boys and young girls playing in them.
The three kindred faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have all set their moral compasses by ideas and ideals of righteousness and justice that originated with the one God of them all, said to dwell on a holy mountain in a holy city. A city where the limitless possibilities of imagination have always held sway over the strict limits of the humanly possible. Much nearer in spirit, tradition, and beliefs than they themselves are always quite willing to accept or admit, it is the close kinship of the three religious creeds that gives hope for the future. After all, in its finest dreams, humankind has always envisioned a most perfect and heavenly domain. Bathed in a soft and soothing light, it is a place untouched by the woes of the world, where harmony, beauty, and truth reign supreme. For countless millions of people these past thousands of years, that sacred and precious realm, tucked away in a warm corner of every heart, has had a name: Jerusalem.